Thank you, Professor Sheehan. In addition to all the nice things she said about me, my nephews and nieces call me Uncle Chuck, which is as much as who I am as all of that stuff. I don't know that my mother would recognize me in the introductions that people give me sometimes. So I'm very, very happy to be with you. Father Peter, I'm especially honored that you came back from Florida. He didn't come back for my talk, but he was there not getting a sundown. He was raising money to keep this university open. So we're deeply grateful for all his work here at Villanova. The talk is entitled Things to Come, and it's based on an H.G. Wells novel from 1933. Some of you who are old might remember that novel. It was called The Shape of Things to Come, and it's about faith, state, and society in our new world. I'm very honored to be the first speaker in this series. I hope that will go on forever and ever. So, Professor Sheehan, thank you very much for inviting me. So here we go. I'm going to talk for maybe 25 minutes or so, and then we're going to have an opportunity for questions and hopefully some decent answers in response to your questions. I don't think my opening line will be surprising, and I think you'll all accept it as true. I say we live in complicated times. It's easy to be angry and distressed. I know I am much of the time. Earlier this month, a friend sent me an email with a message of exactly 4 syllables. It was, "Worse is better." He was quoting a famous line from Vladimir Lenin, and his message did have some merit. The worse things get, the more painful they become. The more painful they become, the more urgently we ask, why? And when we know the reason why behind our troubles, then we can start to fix them. But there are also 2 problems with the Lenin quote. First, it's not clear that he ever actually said those words. And second, even if he did say them, they're not true. Parents of the students massacred last week in Florida don't think worse is better. They know what worse means. It's unbearable. Murders in Chicago have been getting worse for many years. They're now so common that the rest of the country sees them as routine. Worse is not better. And one of the tasks of the church, and each of us as individual believers, is to live and work in ways that do help us make the world around us better. What this means and how we do it are questions I hope we can talk about this afternoon. The subtitle of my remarks is Faith, State, and Society in a New World. Each of those categories, faith, state, and society, each of those categories are important. They're all closely connected in thinking about the shape of our country's future. But I want to reverse their order in my presentation. I'll start with some thoughts on society and end with the role of faith, and especially the mission of the church. The reason is simple. There's no healing without a good and accurate diagnosis. If we claim that we need the church as a source of healing and hope, then we need to show what our culture's illness is and why. So let's turn our focus to that work. We'll begin with a fact. The United States of America is the most powerful market economy in the world. We can probably agree on that. And most of us would probably agree that since World War II, American democratic capitalism has reshaped much of the world, created a new world of political and economic relationships. We can also agree that Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical, Laudato Si, on care for our common home, is a valuable addition to Catholic teaching. I think that's obvious. It builds on the great talks and writings of Pope Benedict XVI about the environment. It extends the body of Catholic thought on the beauty and stewardship of creation in some very important ways. But one of its vulnerabilities to critics is this. It's seen by a lot of people, who I think are decent and ethical people, as undervaluing the good that global market economies have done worldwide. So let me describe that. Capitalism has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It's radically improved their standard of living. It's increased their opportunities and their lifespans. These are very good things, historically unique things. And those are facts, not propaganda. Unless we acknowledge such facts, unless we voice some real gratitude for the human ingenuity they express, we rob ourselves of the credibility to criticize the damage that market economies have also done. That damage is real and often very serious. It goes well beyond wounding the physical environment, and we don't need to be economists to see how it happens. 70 years ago, the economic historian Karl Polanyi wrote a book called The Great Transformation. For readers like me, and maybe others in this room, it's a very dense work, but it's also very important. Polanyi showed how the Industrial Revolution disrupted and reorganized the entire fabric of English life. It revolutionized the structure of the British economy. That much was obvious. But in doing so, it also reshaped every other aspect of the nation's culture, from family relations to politics and education, to the use of time, to patterns of thought and behavior. The same thing is happening here in our own country, in our own time and space. A consumer market economy tends to commodify everything and recast all relationships as transactional. In practice, it depersonalizes a culture by commercializing many of our routine human interactions. It also very easily breeds a practical atheism by revolving our lives around the desire and consumption of new things. In our own case, the trigger has been the microchip and everything useful that comes from it. The internet, robotics, and artificial intelligence, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and thousands of other new tools. My point is this: we use our tools, but our tools also use us. They reframe our assumptions, imaginations, and appetites. They rewire our relationships with each other and the world around us. And in the process, every major new technology also creates a new class of winners and a new class of losers. Ask your local blacksmith if you can find one. So where am I going with this? Our country is built on change because we're a nation of immigrants. Change is natural for us. It's also healthy as long as a nation remains linked in some key organic ways with its past. A nation's identity fractures when it changes so rapidly, so deeply, and in so many ways that the fabric of the culture ruptures in pieces that no longer fit together. I think we're close to that point as a society right now, if not past it. I'll turn 74 in September. In the span of my adult life, the entire landscape of our economy, communications, legal philosophy, science and technology, demography, religious belief, and sexual morality has changed. And not just changed, but changed drastically. In many ways, our world is different in kind from the past, and not just in degree. There's no way to unknow what we've learned or experienced, even if we wanted to. And a lot of the changes have been good. For example, medical progress is just an example. Many of my friends have children with disabilities. The lives of their children are longer and richer precisely because of innovations in medical technology. But it's also true that the benefits and deficits of change have been very unequally shared. The result has been a deep dislocation in the American sense of stability, security, common purpose, and self. As a country, we have one of the highest standards of living in history. We also have one of the worst rates of violence and a growing problem with youth suicide. Wealth increasingly congeals in the educated elite. Meanwhile, the gulf between the very rich and everybody else gets deeper and wider annually. The sexual freedom that progressive-minded wealthy people can afford, and which they strongly affirm, is not allowed to interfere with their own pattern of protecting their advantaged position through stable marriages and the best schools for their children. Meanwhile, the lower classes are wrecked by the same sexual license. And unlike the wealthy, they can't buy their way out of the consequences. They're saddled with destroyed marriages, fatherless children, angry and rootless young males, increased poverty and crime, and all the social crippling results. Philadelphia is one of the premier cities in the most powerful nation on earth, and we still have deep and chronic problems of drugs, unemployment, inadequate schools, and inner city hunger. Hunger in the United States of America. Think about that for a minute. In my experience, this moment in our country's history is the most conflicted and divided since the 1960s. Now, all sorts of bromides are proposed to fix these problems. When our leaders talk about providing a guaranteed family income against poverty, or some form of national income equality, as they sometimes do depending on the party in power, we can be quite sure that it doesn't mean taking their wealth to give to everybody else, at least not in this country. Effective aristocracies don't work that way. They make other people pay for their ideas. And our merit class, the new aristocracy that actually provides most of our country's leaders, both progressive and conservative, is very good at masking its own status. Now, I'm not saying anything new here. Christopher Lasch, George Parkin Grant, Patrick Deneen, and others have made some of the same points earlier and better. So the question then becomes, if our society is really so stressed, why does everything or anything hold together and work? There are two answers to that. Here's the first. This is a very big country with lots of good people, a lot of good laws, a lot of good talent, and a very deep well of strong character and virtue. It takes a long time to use that up. Here's the second answer. The more a civil society splinters and fails, the more government will intrude to keep order and fill in the cracks. And that leads us to some thoughts about politics and the state. I'd argue that we now have a Donald Trump, at least in part, because we had a Barack Obama. Mr. Trump is a reaction. He's a gift from the people who felt, or more accurately knew, that they were treated as stupid and irrelevant by both wings of our political leadership class in the last election cycle. In other words, the basket of deplorables, and I know quite a few decent people who were lumped in that basket, showed up to vote. So for better or worse, President Trump is what we now have. And the responsibility for that surprise is shared by both our national parties. Looking back over the past decades, the Obama White House may be the most influential we've had since Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s. But Roosevelt dealt mainly with the economic and administrative structure of our country's affair. The Obama White House seemed to go much deeper in seeking to shape the nature of our daily life on issues ranging from religious liberty to transgendered rights. And these issues, of course, and others like them, are not morally neutral in the light of Catholic belief. In a sense, the Obama administration both reflected recent social data trends and actively encouraged them. Americans who self-identify as atheists, agnostic, or having no religious affiliation at all went from 16% of the population in 2007, not long ago, to 23% in 2014, in a 7-year period. The Obama presidency embodied the same, more secular spirit. That has political and legal implications. Religious liberty is a good example. Religious freedom, as the nation has traditionally understood it, can't be a major concern for people who don't respect the importance of religious faith. If you're not religious, why would you care? And human rights, without a grounding in God or some higher moral order, are really just a matter of public consensus. They're an act of government, largesse, dressed up in pious language about human dignity. The point is, the country we thought we were living in isn't the country we're actually living in now. The administrative state we now have bears little resemblance to the limited republic we had in 1789. Our institutions and our civic vocabulary may seem the same, but the underlying facts of process and power are very different. Most Americans seem oblivious to the change because nostalgia and distraction prevent us from thinking outside the box of our present reality. That should worry us all, because the social welfare state we seem to like and the surveillance state we seem to need more and more overlap. So, where does faith fit into the story? Some 200 years ago, in Democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville wrote this, quote, "Fixed ideas of God and human nature are indispensable to the daily practice of men's lives." End of quote. We human beings have a primal need to organize ourselves around someone or something that provides our lives with meaning. We have an instinct to sacralize some form of authority. For America's founding generation, that authority was the God of the Bible, not just any God, as Tocqueville stressed, but the God of Moses and the God of Jesus Christ. Our humility before a just and personal God is the cornerstone of American ideals of limited government, whether we want to admit it or not. For historians like Crane Britton, even the Enlightenment and its deism, which also played a key role in the founding, were children of Christianity. They could only emerge from a pre-existing Christian context. The point is, God's authority ensures human freedom. If our faith in him is weakened or destroyed as a source of authority, we'll look for another master. In Tocqueville's words, quote, "If faith be absent in a man, then he must serve. And if he seeks to be free, he must believe." End of quote. Life abhors a vacuum. When God leaves the stage inevitably expands to fill his place. Without the biblical God, we end up in some disguised form of idolatry, and it usually involves politics. This is why anything that enfeebles the believing community from within is so hurtful, not just for the church, but also for a culture of true freedom. There are no new paradigms, no new hermeneutical principles, no revolutions in thought, and no possible concordance with the world and its alibis that can erase the radicalism and liberating beauty of Christian anthropology. Key to that anthropology is the nature of our sexuality, expressed in the complementarity of male and female, and ordered to new life and mutual support. Human sexuality and relationships have a God-given purpose. That purpose is a source of true freedom and joy. It can't be changed or reinterpreted or medically reimagined away. This is the truth about who we are as embodied creatures, no matter what our personal confusion or weaknesses might be. We need to affirm that truth for our own sakes and for the sake of our whole society, because the meaning of our humanity depends on it. And while truth spoken without love and patience can be a weapon, not speaking the truth is a form of theft. Mercy without truth is not mercy. My hope is that great universities like Villanova will always be jealous in protecting their Catholic identity. And not just protecting it, but asserting it. This isn't a time for Catholics to be weak or apologetic. It's not a time to compromise on principles. The witness of faithful Catholic higher education is vital for the whole public square. This is why scholars like Jessica Murdoch, Mary Hirschfeld, Mark Schiffman, and the humanities faculty, Luca Contini, Dr. Sheehan herself, and so many others here are so important, not just for Villanova, for the Villanova community, but for the life of the wider church and the life of our country. Last week, when I was writing these thoughts, I got an email from Charles Camosi, the Fordham theologian and ethicist. I'd like to quote the whole thing here, because it's very exceptional. But I'll share just this brief part. Dr. Camosi wrote, quote, "Ours is a deeply fractured and alienated culture. Many people, especially young people, are desperately looking around for something to ground and claim them, a place to discover and express their true identity. How should the church approach such a cultural moment? With confidence and as a huge opening. There is a political realignment underway that gives us a new opportunity to be faithful to our traditions and teachings, apart from the idolatries of the secular left or the secular right. Many young people today are looking for precisely the kind of practiced, ancient, comprehensive version of the good that the church has to offer, one that is not beholden to the political assumptions of their grandparents. They want their house built on solid ground in the midst of a culture that is at sea. The church should enter confidently into this fragmented reality, as we have in past ages, not only with a powerful and attractive message of love, nonviolence, and special concern for the most vulnerable, but with the goal of giving the culturally homeless a place to call home. There are some who in this cultural moment would call us to retreat, to capitulate, to make a dramatic shift in our paradigm. To those, I respectfully say that you are missing the signs of the times. Far from shrinking from our tradition, far from looking for ways to sidestep the ancient teaching and wisdom revealed by God through the apostles and their successors, it's clear that this moment calls for us to embrace the gift of the deposit of faith that has been handed down to us, offering it in humility and love to a culture in desperate need. The end of the quote. I can't improve on that. So I end with just a few final thoughts. When you get to be my age in this work, you know and understand a lot of things because you've experienced a lot of things and somewhat developed your skill accordingly over many years. But the same experiences that give you a little wisdom and mature judgment can also tend to narrow your ability to recognize new possibilities and solutions. You can end up very good at naming the illness and explaining its nature and cause and knowing what doesn't work in treating it, but not so good at imagining or bringing about a cure. That diagnostic talent still does have value. People need to wake up to the reality of a problem before they can begin to fix it. But the fixing belongs to a different set of faithful eyes and skills, like yours. We live at a time when science and technology can make the sacramental and supernatural seem implausible. They don't and can't disprove God, but they render people indifferent to Him instead. They make the language of faith incomprehensible. But people still suffer, and everyone dies, all of us. So do the persons we care for, which means that all of us, sooner or later, ask the question of why. We have an instinctive need for meaning. People still love, which means we have a deep longing for intimacy, completion in the heart of another, and the fertility of new life. And people still have a need for beauty, which means that beauty has the power to invade the machinery of logic and reach right into the human soul. The church, my dear friends, is expert in all of these things. And all of these things prevent human affairs, no matter how confused, from becoming permanently inhuman. Augustine, the patron of the Augustinian community that established this university, would remind us that history is the great destroyer of national illusions and vanities, even the American kind. But history is also the great wellspring of personal and ecclesial hope. We mustn't be captured by the world, but we very much need to love all the good in it, serving the people who inhabit it, and inviting them to the knowledge and love of Jesus Christ. We should never underestimate the power of personal witness, because without a living example of love that people can see and follow, truth is just sterile ideas. What we do as individual believers matters, because our personal witness shapes others, and each of us, as a child of God, is forever. And what we do as communities of Christian friendship matters just as powerfully, because friendship shapes culture and creates the future. This is why things like communion and liberation, Focolare, Opus Dei, the Neo-Catechumenal Way, the Christian Life Movement, and similar charisms are so important. They're a source of renewal in the Church, which is the sustainer of God's presence in the world. Léon Blois, the great French Catholic convert, liked to say that in the end, the only thing that matters is to be a saint. If we're willing to listen, the Church has lots of good reasons why people should believe in God and in Jesus Christ and in the beauty and urgency of her own mission. But she has only one irrefutable argument for the truth of what she teaches, which is the personal example of her saints. So, this sounds like a bishop, I guess. The task tonight, when each of us leaves here, is to begin that path, to become saints. And if we do, we'll make a big difference. May God guide us all in pursuing this. Thank you for your attention.
Once somebody gets us started, usually you want to follow, so we just need somebody to have the courage.
Yeah.
Ethan, why don't you wait for Mike? It's coming back. I think I could hear you, but I don't know if everybody can hear you in the back there.
Hi, my name is Ethan Swain. I'm a senior humanities and theology major. I think Villanova is at an interesting crossroads as we become a more elite university on the national scale and want to attract a greater national presence. How do you feel the university can stay committed to things like traditional sexual morality in a world, especially in higher ed, that doesn't necessarily want to see that?
Well, it depends on what level you're talking about. What do we do? You know, I think on the personal level, it means we begin to take it seriously ourselves and then share it with our friends, because we can't be faithful Christians alone in today's world. It's almost impossible. The pressure is just too hard otherwise. So we just need to form groups of believers together that aren't exclusive but open to other friendships, but nonetheless support one another. And then when it comes to the more the larger structures of the university, I think heads of departments can make all the difference in the world. And I think hiring for mission is a very important part of Catholic University. And we don't just hire Catholics, but we hire people who share the vision of the university at every level. And if you don't have professors who share that common vision, it won't happen in the classroom. And then at the highest levels, whether it be the board of trustees or the president and executive body, it's the same kind of thing. You have to have a president and the board who are committed to this being not only an excellent university, but an excellent Catholic university. And we need that very much in our society. You know, there are a lot of Catholic universities, but many of them are not perceived as excellent, you know, by their peers. And we have to demonstrate by our activity that we can be both academically excellent and very seriously Catholic at the same time. So, I mean, all those things count, you know. So, as a student, you can take care of that first level pretty serious. As an individual, you can take care of yourself, I guess. You can form a community with others. When you become a teacher, you probably will be someday. You can hopefully find a community of teachers who shares your view and influence a university. And if you become a president of a university, you have a whole lot of power. You know, the same thing's true about our Catholic grade schools, even elementary schools. The principal makes all the difference in the world. If she or he is serious about the Christian faith and wants to help the teachers embrace that and make it a lively part of what they're about, it happens. Without that leadership, even if you have a lot of serious teachers, it doesn't happen. So you need leadership.
Yes, sir.
Here comes the mic. You have a lot of time, so you can just make sure you wait for the mic.
Sure. My name is Alejandro. I recently graduated from the University of Miami, so I guess I came here to Philly to lose my tan.
You'll be successful, I assure you.
Yes. I just want to say thank you very much for coming here. You know, as a recent college grad, it's really admiring to see a church figure standing for goodness, standing against the cultures of society. Just seeing that frankness and being straightforward is really inspiring. And so my question was that young people are increasingly falling to scientism, materialism, and atheist platitudes, mischaracterizing the Catholic faith, many times purely to follow social sentiment. It seems to me that they lack positive experiences of the faith, which can take them out of the bubble that they inhabit. What, therefore, should be the pastoral experience of young college-age people so we can engage them with the church?
Well, you know, I'm told by people who seem to know that young people are losing their faith a lot earlier now than they did just a few years ago, and it's often around this issue of science. And you know, the church is presented by some scientists, some programs, some shows on television as being primitive and not open to the reality of truth. So I think you really do have to start earlier. And the people who have the most influence over children are parents. You know, we used to kind of think when I was younger that the church would take care of the religious education of the children, and parents didn't have to do that. And that's got us into the mess we have now, because the church can't do it. And we can help parents, but we can't replace parents. And it's true about both mothers and fathers. I don't know if you've seen the more recent studies, the vigorous ones I've seen done by Christian Smith out of Notre Dame, say that in terms of religious practice, the father is significantly more important than the mother for the practice of daughters as well as sons. And we often have thought, you know, popularly that women are, you know, the backbone of the church. They are in terms of workers, without a doubt. But in terms of the influence for religious practice of children, the father makes a big difference. So the real answer for everything is the family. You know, Pope John Paul II, the saint, Pope John Paul II said, everything of significance in our lives passes through the family, for good or for bad. You know? And we have a collapse of family life going on, and we don't seem to do much about it in terms of political structures that can support family life. But it's true. You know, we moan about multiple divorces and, you know, the instability that brings into the life of children. The, you know, thing that makes us most sane in life are having a mom and dad who love one another. It gives us the personal kind of security that we don't have otherwise. So it's hugely important. So is school and university, education, all those kind of things that we spend so much time and attention on. But we really need to form much more time and attention as a church and as individuals about family life. So who you're going to marry is the most significant question most people have to ask. Who are they going to marry? And they have to marry someone who's going to be the mother of their children or the father of their children, and who they want to be with when they're 60 years old. It can't be about sex and, you know, and being with the, you know, the right kind of person, the way they look or the money they have. It has to be those kind of qualities. So we all make those decisions, you know, throughout our life in very incremental ways, and we just have to teach our children that they have to prepare for already as little kids for their spouse, what they're going to be looking for, because the world will be giving them different kind of messages about that. And we have to, as a church, find different and new kind of structures to support family life. You know, the church, for example, I'll give you an example, is kind of hostile in most dioceses towards homeschooling. And the reason for that, I think, basically, we always say, well, the kids are not going to be acculturated because they're going to be, you know, a primitive little community of their family. But the real reason most of the time is because if you have everybody homeschooling, they don't pay tuition to keep our institutional schools open. And that's really true, you know. So we have to be willing to support both, because parents who are homeschooling aren't doing it because it's fun. They're doing it because they think it's very important for their children, for their own children's stability and knowledge. And I think studies show that it is an effective way. Now, our schools are also effective. I'm not speaking in favor of homeschooling over Catholic schools, but we have to, as a church, see that we have a duty, as much of a duty, to support people who do homeschooling as we do support those who send their kids to our Catholic schools, whether it be elementary or high schools or universities. I guess you can't do homeschooling at universities. Well, I guess you did. Maybe online stuff is pretty much homeschooling without supervision, you know. Does that, you know, it sounds, you know, often we just have to go back to the basics. I don't have any kind of romantic solutions to all these problems, except let's get serious about the basics. If we did that, things would be different, you know, rather than just bow in the direction of the basics. If we actually practice what we preach, we'd be pretty terrific.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Christopher. I am a freshman at Villanova in the School of Business.
Where are you from?
I'm from northern New Jersey, about 20 minutes outside New York City.
Okay.
So, an important point you referred to today was how many more people have grown to see religion and science, technology as more mutually exclusive. Now, a group that I'm on campus that I'm involved with is a learning community called Faith and Reason, led by Sister Beth at Villanova.
Great.
So my question for you is, how can we grow to see Faith and Reason as very much compatible?
Well, you know, I don't know the program you're involved in. I don't know it, but it sounds fascinating. And the way you come to accept that is someone teaches you that. I mean, if there aren't people who are teaching it, there's no one to hear it, right? So we have to develop a vigorous program of actually demonstrating to those we say they're compatible, demonstrating that they are. And that means giving families tools. You know, if it's true that males especially are losing their faith in the 6th grade because of this science question, then where are they hanging out? They're hanging out with their families. So you have to give parents the tools, pass that information on to children. You can't wait till you get to college. It's way too late. So we need to develop tools that we can get into the hands of parents. You know, if I were a parent today, I'd be wanting to go to education programs to teach me how to do those kind of things. But I don't know if those kind of programs exist. One of the things I'm trying to do, because of the presence of the Pope here for World Meeting of Families 2 years ago, you weren't here, but he came, is try to reorganize all of our diocesan life in a way that reaches out to supporting family life, which means, you know, that we need to start developing the tools to help parents do that kind of education at home. It has to happen early. So if one of the things you might do as a project, if you get seriously into this, is get your group to develop those kind of tools, and we'll get them published and into the hands of parents. That would be a wonderful thing. Well, I'm glad you have that kind of program here with Sister Beth. Is Sister Beth here by any chance?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Professor Betts.
My name's Joe Betts.
Hi, Professor. Here comes a mic. Here comes a mic, Professor. It's coming from the other direction. What do you teach, Professor?
I'm a retired philosophy teacher.
Okay.
What is ex corde ecclesia? When I was still teaching here, the document came from the Vatican. I know it means from the heart of the church. I know it had to do with Catholic education, especially at the higher levels. I know it involved powers given to the bishop of the diocese. What is it? How has it been exercised from your office in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, please?
Okay. Well, it was a document that was written by Pope John Paul II, and it was written at the request of bishops around the world, maybe especially from the United States, to reflect on the question of how can a university maintain its excellence and independence and at the same time be Catholic? You know, the universities as we know them in the West were originally Catholic in their founding. The first one was in Bologna, Italy, actually. And so the Pope wrote this document, which is extraordinary, and it talks about all kinds of things, about hiring for mission and also ongoing education for teachers in the schools, universities. And then each conference of Catholic bishops was requested by the Pope to write an application about how does this document, which is very theoretical and beautiful, how is it applied in the country in which you are actually administering. And so the American bishops did that. I was a bishop already when that was done. And we came up with a document that actually, quite honestly, had no teeth in it. You know, it was a matter of, let's have dialogues where the bishop will have a dialogue every year with universities in his diocese. We actually have 11 of those here in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, and talk about the issue of Catholic identity. Professors are asked, if they're teaching theology or philosophy, to ask for a mandate, which is an authorization of the bishop to teach that area at the university. But instead of it becoming required, it's optional and left up to the professor. Not even the president of the university can't require it of the professors. So everything's kind of on the basis of everybody agreeing and getting along without having any kind of authority to enforce anything, quite honestly. And you know, there's a great fear on the part of the universities that the church will try to control them and take away freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of teaching. And so they don't like the fact that the church would want to have anything to say about it. And you have a whole lot of bishops who are afraid to take on concerns they might have about universities because they know they wouldn't be well received. You know. So in the end, I guess I have the authority to declare that a university is not Catholic because of the way what it's teaching or what it's not doing. But aside from that, I don't have anything other than a persuasive voice and asking for cooperation. Is that kind of what you wanted to know?
Yes.
But that's because we decided as a bishops' conference to approach it from that kind of volunteer approach rather than having requirements.
Can you tell me how many asked for that mandate?
Well, I would be guessing rather than, not very many, you know, but a few. You know, there's 1 or 2 a year. I mean, that's all it is, you know, 1 or 2 a year. But it's only in the areas of theology and you know, the ecclesiastical sciences, theology and philosophy, where it's required. But when you come to Catholic spirit, oftentimes that's determined in the English and history departments rather than the theology and philosophy departments, because in my experience, that's where the most hostility towards traditional Catholic values and understanding of history come from, not from the theology or philosophy faculties themselves.
This gentleman right here, Steve. Yes.
Paul Garrity, class of 1974. Your Excellency, I think it's great that you come out and talk to people like this. And a minute ago, you talked about the basics. And communicating a message, I think, is about reaching the most people in the shortest period of time. And I'm wondering, with respect to the basics, what's being done to affect the renewal of parish life? Recognition that many people, they don't walk away from the church over doctrine. They walk away over Sunday liturgy and just being done with boredom and structure that doesn't really fit into a YouTube and Twitter society. And I think especially with children walking away at younger ages, I think one of the things we need to do, in addition to all the other things you talked about, is find a way to renew the practice of the liturgy in our parishes.
Well, I would agree with you 100%. But again, I say that's not the beginning point. The beginning point is families who actually decide to go to that liturgy. You can have a wonderful liturgy where the priest actually preaches very well and music is good and no one shows up because the families just aren't committed to going. So, you know, I think my priests and myself have the duty to be better preachers, you know, because people often complain that they're not fed. You know, I go to parishes Saturday night and Sundays. I rotate around to see what's going on. I don't tell people I'm coming in advance, so I'll see what's really going on. And sometimes it's not very good. But the worst part isn't the music or the preaching, it's the fact that the pews are empty. And they haven't all been chased away by bad preaching and by bad music. People just have, over the years, decided that attending Mass on Sunday is no longer a serious obligation. You know, I gave a sermon some years ago where I asked the question, do you remember the days when it was required to go to Mass on Sunday? Everybody raised their hand, yeah. And I said, well, you know, it still is. But they really didn't know that. I mean, that it somehow escaped, and it's because parents have not passed it on to their children. You know, so all of us have our part. You know, the priest has his part, the bishop has his part, but parents have all of it, fundamentally. And it's going to be more and more that case in a world that's less friendly towards religion. You know, I think that I was at a program in Notre Dame not too long ago about this kind of issue, and they were saying that the father is a new priest of the church, or the new bishop. But it's not, you know, St. John Chrysostom said every father's a bishop. So it's kind of an old thought, but it's being said in new ways, that the kind of influence that the pastor used to have on children is now more and more the responsibility of mom and dad. But you're right, you know, and I told my seminarians, I tell them every year, I tell them, last week I spoke to both the theology department and the college department of seminary, that the two things I hear most complain about are preaching and music. And we need to do, it's all about liturgy, well, you know what you're saying, so we need to do our best. But if there's nobody there, it's going to be kind of hard. So we have to get people there by finding a way of educating parents. Now, it's all in the hands of God, ultimately, because he's the one who gives the grace of conversion, not anybody else. But so I often pray that the Lord will do his part. He doesn't listen to me all the time.
Yes, sir. Mike's coming.
Coming across the way, coming the other direction.
Hi, I'm Steve, the window washer. It's raining today. But as far as the kids going to Mass, you know, that was one of the, and I got a 22-year-old now going to temple and a 20-year-old, 18. My 18-year-old daughter's fine. She's going to Archbishop Chaput, and I said, look, you don't want to go to Catholic, you want to go to a Catholic school, you go to Mass on Sunday. But the older guys, you know, one said the other day, she said, you're the only one I know. All my friends, they don't have to go to church on Sunday. The parents, you know. Because he's old, he's 22, he can do what he wants. But the rule is, you're at our house, you go to Mass. But the problem I see is that all their friends, you know, like you said, the parents don't, you know, it's not that important. And thank God that my wife and I, that was one thing we could agree on when we got married. If I may, for the youngsters here, if you want, whatever your partner is, if you have 3, 4, 5, 10 kids, just think of your partner. And you want 5 more people like your partner, then you know, that's good.
You know, one of the things I think that our Catholic universities ought to do, when all of our universities, campus ministry, is to form the kind of business of where you form peer groups where people support one another. And those have been very effective. You know, again, it's not just the pastor preaching, but it's also you have Bible studies of like-minded young people who support one another. The Fellowship of Catholic University focuses especially good at that. I'd like to see them at every campus in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, where it's peer-to-peer ministry. But more than that, it just teaches them that the way you build Christian life is to form communities. That's how it began, you know. And it was basically lay. You know, most of the early Christians were not priests, they were lay people. They were the missionaries. We all have a co-responsibility for passing on the faith to the next generation. That's just not the role of sisters and brothers and priests and deacons. I'll do 2 more questions and we'll get out of here so you can leave. 2 more.
This young lady here. I'm not so young, but thank you.
Well, you have to wait for the microphone.
Okay.
I had a quick question.
Who are you?
I'm Suzanne.
Okay.
And I work at Villanova. But I had a quick question going back to your comment about mercy and truth working together, because I find that one of the things that's a challenge for me, and I hope other people can relate to this, is just how do you have meaningful discourse privately or in the public arena where you can bring those together, because too often it becomes kind of acrimonious or just very divided, and I would like your thoughts on that, if you don't mind.
Well, I think it is very acrimonious because we've somehow created this formal cultural spirit that we can't criticize each other, that you're being intolerant if you criticize. And there's no way you can challenge people unless you can criticize. You have to do it in a loving way, or else you're just beating somebody up. But you know, the way we need to deal with others on these kind of issues is the way we would deal with our adult children. You tell them the truth, even if they don't want to hear it. And if you have to risk something, that you don't risk their anger, or you'll risk their breaking friendship, or whatever it might be. But parents don't do any good to their children by letting their children just do what they want and think what they want. So it seems to me that we should treat everybody that we know as a member of our family. When I say parent, I don't mean mother to child, you know, talking down to them. I mean just the way you would actually deal with somebody you care about. And we care about someone, we tell them the truth. And you know, there's techniques you can use by saying, you know, I know you think differently than I do, but this is what I think. Rather than saying, you're wrong. You know, you actually engage in a dialogue from the beginning. You know, those are really important techniques because they keep people from immediately getting angry. But if you're not willing to be rejected, you ain't going to do that. You know, it requires a certain amount of personal courage on our part to be rejected because we love people. You know, if you love people and you want to do what's good for them, you take risks for that love, and that sometimes means the risk of being rejected by speaking the truth. But again, always with love. And you can. You know, Jesus did it all the time. The woman at the well, he told her the truth. He told her things she didn't want to hear, and she said it at the beginning, but as time went on, she was able to listen to him because of his persistent kindness and love. The woman can't get taken in adultery, you know. The way he dealt with St. Peter, you know, 3 times, you love me, Peter. You know, he denied him 3 times. He was rubbing it in. He was teaching him a lesson, you know. So we just need to be able to risk that by really caring for people.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
What's your name?
Declan, Carolyn.
Hi, Declan.
Freshman political science and history major. Your Excellency, thank you for coming out and speaking to us. I think I can speak for everyone when I say it's been excellent and we really appreciate it. With regards to the state, you mentioned that the government of the United States in 1789 is not the same as the government today. And in these changing and tumultuous times, where things are constantly shifting and evolving, how are we to distinguish between government that is necessary and government that is unnecessary? Is it also true that as times change, the reach of government also changes and the things government becomes responsible for evolves? How are we to know where that responsibility lies as time goes on?
You know, I don't know how to answer that question theoretically, but I know the ones who should answer it are those who we elect. And they should have intelligence enough to ask those questions. Now, many of them probably don't know anything about the founding of the country. They don't really know the kind of principles that we were based on, so they don't even know how to ask those questions. So we need to make sure that you run for office. And people like you. And there are many answers to those questions that are Christian, where people differ with one another. You can be a really good Democrat and be a really good Catholic. You can be a really good Republican and be a really good Catholic, as long as you respect the dignity of every individual, born and unborn, and that you have a real commitment to the common good of all, not just to part of society. But how to put put flesh on those bones is a responsibility of politicians, not me. You know, and I think the role of the church is to call people to that, and then when they see that it's not working, to call people out of whatever they're doing. But we're not, the church is separated from Satan, thanks be to God. So I hope we can give you the tools and principles, both in the school and also in your church community, that you can be a good politician, whether you run for office or you just work for a party or you just vote. But nonetheless, you ask the right questions and you demand the right answers from those who serve us as political leaders. I think being a politician is a noble vocation if it's entered for the right reason and is lived faithfully.
Thank you.
Before we close this afternoon, I want to recognize Dr. Schrems, who is here, who is the person, for better or worse, who got me here to Villanova. Thank you very much for that, Jack. So many years
Where is
ago.
he? Where is he?
Right here.
Raise your hand, Doctor. Oh, there he is. Good for you.
And I also want to say thank you to all the people who are here at Villanova now, students, faculty, staff, everyone who's part of the community here for coming, and all the people from the community and alums for being here. You are welcome to all of our events. We'd love to have you. There's a sheet outside if you want to be on our mailing list so we can let you know about events that are coming up. Come and be part of this. We want to do this together with all of you. So thanks so much for being here.
And Dr. Sheehan, thank you for organizing this.